So apparently my phone ran out of memory on me. So I deleted a few things, and rather than re-record all of that, I'm just going to kind of pick up where I left off because I was about to wrap it up anyway. So I was talking about the significance of the Mass of Notre Dame by Machaut. And I mentioned several things that are significant about it, but maybe the most significant thing in hindsight is that it started a tradition. Machaut kind of invented this genre called the Mass, but composers after him took it up. Hundreds of years of composers writing hundreds, thousands of masses, taking up the same basic idea as Machaut. Now, that many different styles, as we'll see, as we go through different periods in music history, but the basic idea, taking those 5 prayers, the ordinary prayers of the Mass, and setting them to music, was something that pretty much all serious composers did for a long time after Machaut's death, and even right up to the present day. The Mass was sort of like the big, important work, in the same way that for a writer, there are lots of different types of works you can produce: poems, short stories, essays, but the novel is sort of like the big one, right? For an architect, you could design houses, you could design shopping malls, but a skyscraper is sort of like the big one. Well, the big one in the music world for a long time was the Mass. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about this specific movement from the Mass of Notre Dame, which is in your listening. There's a listening guide here on page 80, which has the entire brief text, which is in Latin. You might be familiar with the English translation, which is down the right-hand column, but in the original Latin, it's simply Agnus Dei qui tollis peccata mundi miserere nobis. Agnus Dei qui tollis peccata mundi miserere nobis. Agnus Dei qui tollis peccata mundi dona nobis pacem. Grant us peace. Now notice the structure of that text is A, B. We have that sentence, Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world, have mercy on us. And then we repeat it the exact same way. Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world, have mercy on us. But the third time, it's different. Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world, grant us peace. So it's an AAB structure in the text. Because the structure of the text is AAB, Machaut structures the music that lines up with those 3 different sentences ABA, so that we don't have the text and the music changing at the same time. Where the text remains the same, the music changes. And where the music remains the same, the text changes. Now, you will hear that this is in 4-part polyphonic texture. So we have 4 different voice parts, all men singing, by the way. Certainly would have been originally, because remember, women were not allowed to sing in church unless they were nuns in a convent. So this would have been all male voices, and you will hear that the voice ranges are kind of narrow and kind of pinched. Everybody is singing in a fairly high and narrow range. Right? This is something that's going to change when we move into the Renaissance. The range of available voices is going to get bigger because we are now going to start seeing more exploitation of the bass range. So we have 4 different voices with 4 different melodic lines with great rhythmic complexity, because remember, this is music of the Ars Nova. That's the main feature of the music of this period, this rhythmic complexity, which is made possible by this new system of rhythmic notation. And the result is, it's kind of hard to understand the text, actually. Now, the words that they're singing, you can follow along with the original Latin, but you'll have a hard time doing it, actually. Because, again, we have 4 different melodic lines. They're all singing the same words, but not at the same time. And they each have their own very complex rhythm. And this tends to kind of obscure the text. Now, Machaut might say, if we were to criticize him for this, say, wait a minute, we can't understand the words. He may very well have said something like this: the words, everybody knows the words. It's the Agnus Dei. These are the same words that have been part of the Mass for 1,000 years. And we're talking even in the 1300s, it was part of the Mass for 1,000 years. The words are not that important. Everybody knows what the words are. You don't need to hear the words that clearly. It's as long as you know what the words are, right? You don't have to actually hear exactly all the different words. As long as you know what they are, which you do, because it's an Agnus Dei. And again, back then, everybody knew these prayers backwards and forwards. They recited them every week. Even if they didn't necessarily understand the Latin, they understood the significance of it. All right. Another feature of this music is you are going to hear some kind of bizarre, strange harmony as these different voices moving in their own different directions coincide on different chords. And sometimes these chords, let's say, blend together well, like at the beginning and end of a phrase, we have a nice consonance, but in between, we can have quite a bit of dissonance. As these voices move their own way, sometimes creating sort of clashes and tension. Right? This music was written from a time before composers kind of developed this system of tonal harmony that I talked about back in the Elements. Remember when I talked about harmony and I was talking about tonal music and tonal harmony that uses chords in a certain logical way, etc. Well, this music really is from just before that era begins. So there is harmony, but it's what we might call modal harmony instead of tonal harmony. And I kind of doubt that Machaut was thinking very much in terms of chords. He wasn't thinking very consciously, I don't believe anyway, of creating certain chords so much as he was thinking of creating multiple melodies that, as a byproduct, coincidentally happen to create chords or harmonies. But there's much more emphasis on the linear aspect, we might say the horizontal aspect of the melodic lines, than there is on the vertical aspect, that is the chords that are made as we go. Now, there is definitely an effort to bring things together to create consonants at the ends of each of these sentences, at what we would call the cadence, sort of at the resting point between each of these three sentences. But in between, again, you have all kinds of sometimes kind of downright strange dissonances. So, listen to these two pieces by Machaut. Try and understand the Ars Nova within the 14th century and these different sort of cultural trends that are happening, right? Don't just memorize a bunch of different terms. Try and put together the big picture, this picture of, let's say, the 14th century as a time of disruption and change and crisis, time of bubonic plague and breakdown of the church, the single most powerful and important institution in Europe is in crisis, it's fractured, it's losing its authority, right? We have the 100 Years' War, we have lots of stuff going on in the 14th century, most of it bad, but all of it disruptive. And in the background of all this, and contributing to all this, and being contributed to by all of this, is this relentless trend towards greater secularization, of simply interest in things of this world, sort of a change in attitude away from the medieval attitude and eventually towards what we will recognize as the attitude of the Renaissance. So that's where I'm going to start with next time. I'm going to talk about this new attitude of the Renaissance, which has a name. We could call it humanism. I'm going to talk about the tremendous change during the Renaissance, not only in people's attitudes, but in so many ways. For example, the discovery of the New World by Europeans, this continent on which we are sitting having these lectures, that took place during the Renaissance. Lots of stuff took place during the Renaissance, a fascinating time. So next time, I'm going to spend the entire lecture just talking about the historical background, and hopefully you'll get a sense of why the Renaissance is a different era than the Middle Ages. Right? There are going to be some things that the music has in common from one era to the next, but there are going to be a lot of differences, and we'll find out next time. Sorry for the technical difficulties. Next time, we will hopefully have one intact lecture on the Renaissance. See you then.